If A. Relax, I'll be home in a week. Text can end a marriage in one screenshot. What happens when the husband replies with a selfie, holding her single sister, and her phone starts ringing like someone just hit an alarm? My name is Ethan Cole, and I used to believe that jealousy was a young man's hobby, like bar fights and loud cars and pretending you did not care when you clearly did. I was 35, married, steady, and so predictable that even our coffee maker seemed bored with me. I worked clean hours, paid bills on time, and came home the same way every night, carrying groceries like a peace offering and small talk like a shield. My wife, Lena, used to say she loved that about me. The calm, the routine, the way I could make a life feel safe without making it feel small. The problem with being the safe choice is that people start treating you like furniture, and furniture does not get asked how it feels about the weather. The message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, right when my phone was already irritated from too many reminders and not enough silence. I was in the back office of the storage facility where I managed leases and kept track of who paid late and who lied about it. The printer was jammed, the fluorescent lights made everyone look guilty, and I could smell old cardboard even with the door closed. I saw Lena's name, and for a second my body relaxed on instinct, like a dog hearing the key in the lock. Then I read it, and the relaxation turned into something colder, something that did not ask permission before it moved in. Wife went on vacation. With her ex and messaged, "Relax, I will be home in a week." That was the whole thing, presented like a final answer on a test I did not remember signing up for. No question marks, no explanation, no soft landing. Just a command disguised as reassurance. Relax. Like my emotions were a thermostat she could adjust from a beach chair. I stared at the words until they started to feel less like a message and more like an eviction notice for the version of myself that still trusted her. Lena's ex had a name, of course, and it had been floating around our lives for years, like lint that never fully disappears. Owen Vance. An old boyfriend from before me, before marriage, before Lena decided grown up was a verb. Owen was the kind of man who still lived like the world was a stage, and he was always close to applause, even when nobody was clapping. He sold something vague in the consulting universe, traveled enough to make it look like success, and posted photos that suggested his life was one long highlight reel. When Lena mentioned him, it was always with that practiced tone that meant I was supposed to be mature about it, the same tone people use when they ask you to accept a bad deal because they have already accepted it for you. In our marriage, Owen was a ghost we kept feeding. Not with blood, just with attention, with updates, with casual stories about someone Lena used to know, with the occasional comment about how he always understood her. Every time I flinched, Lena would say I was being dramatic. Every time I went quiet, she would say I was punishing her. Every time I asked for a boundary, she would say I was insecure. The words changed, but the goal never did. Keep me explaining myself until I sounded unreasonable, then make my discomfort the real problem. When I drove home that night, the city looked the same, but it felt like someone had adjusted the lighting. Every streetlight seemed harsher. Every reflection in store windows looked like a stranger trying to imitate me. I parked in our building's lot and walked upstairs with a key that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Inside, the apartment was clean in a way that was not normal for Lena, and that told me everything I needed to know about how planned this was. The small suitcase she kept for weekend trips was gone. Her toiletries were missing from the bathroom. The closet had a strip of empty hangers like pulled teeth. She had left without a fight because she did not believe she owed me one. I did not throw anything. I did not slam doors. That kind of noise is what people expect from a man who has been cornered. Noise makes you easy to frame. Noise makes you the headline in someone else's story. I made dinner for one and ate it standing up, because sitting at the table felt like agreeing that nothing had changed. Then I washed the plate, dried it, and put it away with a calm that made my own skin itch. Around 10, my phone buzzed again. A photo from Lena, palm trees, and a hotel balcony, the kind of place that charges extra for water and calls it hydration. No caption, just proof. I studied the picture like it was evidence, and in a way it was. There was a second glass on the table, slightly out of focus, like an accident that had been carefully placed. She wanted me to see it. She wanted my imagination to do the work, because imagination is the most efficient weapon there is. I set my phone down and stared at the ceiling until the plaster patterns started to look like maps. In the middle of that quiet, a different thought arrived, not emotional, not loud, just sharp. Lena had made a decision and sent me the result. She expected me to sit in my own life like a waiting room. She expected me to be on hold for a week, listening to whatever music she chose. She expected my role to remain stable while she tested how unstable she could be. I did not want revenge in the movie sense, with broken bottles and screaming. I wanted something more precise. I wanted a consequence that fit the crime, something that could not be dismissed as a tantrum. Lena had used the word relax like it was a leash. Fine, I would relax too. I would relax so hard that the whole structure she relied on would start to sag. Her sister Maya called the next morning, and it was almost funny how timing works when people lie for long enough. Maya had always been the single sister, the label that followed her like a shadow at family dinners. Lena would make jokes about it, sweet little jabs disguised as concern. Maya would smile and shrug and drink her wine like she was swallowing an insult. I liked Maya because she had an honest face, the kind that makes it hard to pretend you did not notice things. She was 2 years younger than Lena and lived across town in a small rented place that always smelled faintly like cinnamon and laundry detergent. She worked in event planning, which meant her life was full of other people's expectations, and she was tired in a way that never got acknowledged. When Maya called, her voice sounded thin, stretched tight like a wire. She asked if Lena was home. I told her Lena was not, and I did not add anything else. Maya went quiet for a beat, and I could hear the kind of breathing people do when they are trying not to say the wrong thing. Then she asked if she could come by, just for a minute, because she needed to talk and she did not want to do it over the phone. I said yes because curiosity is a lever, and because I already knew that Lena's version of the story was being delivered to people like packages. If I did nothing, the only narrative that would exist was hers. If I spoke too soon, I would look reactive. The trick is to move before the story hardens, but after the other person has left fingerprints. Maya arrived around noon. She looked like she had dressed in the dark and regretted it halfway through. Her eyes were red, not from crying in front of me, but from crying earlier, alone, where nobody could judge her for it. She stepped inside, saw the emptier apartment, and her face shifted like she had walked into the wrong reality. She asked what was going on. I told her what Lena had told me, and I watched Maya's mouth tighten as if she was chewing on something bitter. She asked if I thought Lena was really with Owen. I said I did not do guesses anymore, because guesses are how people get manipulated. Maya nodded too quickly, like she wanted to believe me, but she had already been handed a different script. Then she said something that made the room feel smaller. She said Lena had been telling their mother that I was controlling, that I had been acting weird, that I was trying to isolate her from friends. Maya said it like she hated the words, even as she repeated them, like she knew they were wrong, but did not know how to prove it. That was the moment I understood the real shape of Lena's plan. She was not just taking a trip. She was setting a stage. She was building a cushion to land on in case the fall got loud. I asked Maya what Lena had told her. Maya hesitated, then admitted that Lena had said the trip was for mental health, that Owen was just a friend, and that I was overreacting. Maya's eyes flicked to my face like she expected anger, and maybe she expected me to beg for sympathy. I did neither. I let her see my calm. Calm is unsettling when someone expects you to perform. Maya sat on the couch, and the couch looked too big with Lena gone. She asked if I was okay. I said I was still deciding what okay meant. She gave a small, humorless laugh at that, and then her shoulders finally dropped, like she had been holding them up for days. She told me she had not slept. She told me Lena had called her late the night before, half drunk, bragging about the hotel and the attention and how free she felt. Maya said Lena had made a comment about how even if I got mad, I would never leave because I was too predictable. Predictable. That word again, used like a knife in a soft hand. I asked Maya if she wanted coffee. She said yes. I made it, and I noticed my hands were steady. That steadiness surprised me because I could feel the anger somewhere inside, but it had nowhere to go, so it turned into focus. Maya sipped her coffee and stared at the window like she was trying to see the future in the glass. When she finished, she said she should go, because being here felt like being part of something she did not understand. I told her she did understand more than she thought. Maya looked at me, and for a second her face showed the same exhaustion I felt, the kind that comes from being used as a prop in someone else's drama. Before she left, she asked if Lena had sent any other messages. I told her about the balcony photo. Maya's jaw tightened again. She asked if I was going to call Lena. I said no. I said Lena wanted noise, and I was not giving her that. Maya studied me like she was trying to decide if I was dangerous or just finally awake. After she left, I walked through the apartment like a man inspecting a crime scene. The bedroom had the faintest smell of Lena's perfume, and it made my stomach turn, not from love, but from the fact that scent is such a cheap way to haunt someone. On the kitchen counter, there was a small note Lena had written for herself, a shopping list with sunscreen and charger and new dress. She had planned this like a celebration. I sat at the table and opened my phone again. Lena had sent another message, shorter, sharper. She asked why I was not responding. She said she did not want drama. She told me to stop being weird. She said she loved me. The words came in waves, each one trying to reset the tone, to pull me back into the role of the man who would swallow his feelings and apologize for having them. I did not answer. I let the silence sit long enough for it to become its own message. Then I did something that would have shocked the older version of me, the version that still believed love meant giving the other person endless benefit of the doubt. I called Maya. She answered quickly, like she had been waiting for the phone to ring. I told her I needed a favor, but not the kind that would put her in the middle. I told her I needed a picture, something simple, something that would say a lot without me having to explain anything. Maya asked what I meant, and I told her to come back for 10 minutes because I did not want to describe it over the phone. Maya returned with a cautious look, like she expected to walk into a storm. I met her at the door, and I did not invite her all the way in. I told her to stand beside me in the hallway, where the light was bright and the neighbors could hear if anyone yelled. Maya asked what I was doing. I told her I was answering Lena in her own language, but without the lies. Maya frowned, confused, then her eyes widened as she started to understand. She said she did not want to hurt her sister. I told her sister was already hurting people, and the only question was whether we kept pretending it was accidental. Maya swallowed, looked down the hallway, then back at me, and I saw something harden in her face. Not hatred, but a refusal to keep playing nice for someone who never had. I held my phone up. I stood close enough to Maya that it looked intimate but not obscene, close enough that anyone looking would fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. Maya did not smile. She did not flirt. She just stood there, shoulder against mine, eyes forward, expression calm, like she was done apologizing for existing. I snapped the photo. Then I typed the message, because words matter, and Lena had been careless with them. Wife went on vacation with her ex and messaged, "Relax, I will be home in a week." I sent a selfie holding her single sister. "Relax, no one is waiting. You have already been replaced." I read it once. It was brutal, clean, and unfair in exactly the way Lena had been unfair to me. It did not claim anything illegal. It did not confess to anything real. It simply told her that the role she assumed she owned was now vacant. In a world built on appearances, vacancy is a threat. Maya looked at the screen and went pale. She asked if I was really going to send it. I told her Lena had already sent her version of reality to everyone who would listen, and I was only returning the favor. Maya hesitated, then nodded once, sharp and final, like she was signing a document. I pressed send. For 3 seconds, nothing happened, and my heartbeat stayed steady like it was proud of itself. Then my phone lit up like a warning sign. First a call, then another, then message after message stacking on the screen so fast I could not read them all. Lena's name kept flashing, the way it does when someone thinks their voice still has authority. Maya stared at the phone like it was a live animal. She whispered that Lena was going to explode. I told her that was the point, because explosions reveal what people have been hiding under their calm. The buzzing did not stop. It turned into a relentless rhythm, like a knock on a door that would not be opened. Lena was calling because the story had slipped out of her hands, and she could not stand the feeling. She was messaging because she needed to regain control of the narrative, and control has always been her real addiction. I did not answer. I watched it all come in, and I felt something in me settle into place, something that had been loose for years. I was not scared of her anger anymore. I was curious about what it would force her to admit. Maya stepped back, looking suddenly like she wanted to disappear. She said she should go. I told her she did not have to carry this, and I meant it. Maya nodded, eyes shining with stress and something like relief, and she left without saying goodbye, like she was walking away from a fire she did not start. The hallway went quiet again, but my phone stayed alive in my hand, vibrating with Lena's panic. I looked at the screen, at her name, at the little missed call numbers climbing like a scoreboard, and I realized I had only pulled the first thread. Because if Lena was this desperate to reach me, it was not just about jealousy. It was about fear. And the next message that finally broke through the flood was not from Lena at all. It was from a number I did not recognize, and it began with a single line that made my stomach drop even as my mind sharpened. It said that I had no idea who I had just involved. The unknown number sat on my screen like a toothache, the kind you cannot ignore because it keeps reminding you it exists. And I let it ring once before I answered. Not because I was brave, but because I was tired of being managed by silence that other people controlled. The voice on the line was a woman's, steady but strained, as if she had already screamed somewhere else and had no energy left for decoration. She did not introduce herself the way polite people do when they are calling a stranger. She introduced herself the way people do when they are delivering a consequence. She said her name was Claire, and she said she was Owen Vance's wife, and my first reaction was not shock so much as a quiet, bitter amusement at how many surprises Lena had managed to package into 1 week. Claire did not sound like a woman calling to negotiate, and she did not sound like a woman calling to beg either. She sounded like someone who had finally located the exact address where a lie was living, and now she wanted the lights turned on. She said she had seen my message, because Owen's phone had been exploding too, and she said she did not care about my marriage drama as a concept, but she cared very much about the fact that her husband was in Miami with my wife and had been pretending it was harmless. Because harmless trips do not require secret calls and late-night texts and a voice that drops into a whisper when you walk into the room. She said she did not blame me for sending the selfie, and that was the first time all day that anyone's words felt like they belonged to reality. I asked how she got my number, and she answered like it was obvious, like I was the one being naive. She said my wife's name was in Owen's recent messages, and my name was in my wife's contact card, and she did not need a spy agency to do what a betrayed spouse can do with a shaking hand and 10 minutes of quiet. She told me she had taken screenshots, and she said that if I was smart, I would start doing the same, because the next phase of this was not going to be emotional, it was going to be logistical, and logistical damage is what lasts. While she talked, I walked back into my kitchen, sat at the table, and stared at Lena's shopping list on the counter like it was a confession written in cheap ink. My phone kept lighting up with Lena's name, and I kept letting it die on its own, because I was not going to meet her where she felt powerful. Claire asked if Lena had ever mentioned that Owen was married now, and I paused because that question did not have a clean answer. Lena had mentioned it, casually, like it was a minor detail that should not weigh anything down, and she had also mentioned, just as casually, that Owen's marriage was complicated, which is the word people use when they want you to accept immoral behavior as a natural weather pattern. Claire said she wanted to be clear about one thing, and she slowed her voice like she was stepping carefully across broken glass. She said Owen had been telling her the trip was a work conference, and she said he had insisted my wife was only meeting friends, and she said he had even laughed when she asked about Lena, because laughing is the easiest way to make someone doubt themselves. She told me she was done doubting, and she asked me if I would share what I knew, not because she was trying to make friends, but because she was trying to build a timeline that could not be argued with. I should have felt something soft for her in that moment, some shared sorrow, some tragic solidarity, but what I felt was sharper than that, because I could already see the next move Lena would make. Lena would try to turn this into a misunderstanding, and if that did not work, she would turn it into my fault, and if that did not work, she would turn it into my instability. A woman like Lena does not fear being wrong. She fears losing control of the story. Claire was not calling to cry with me. Claire was calling to take control of her own story back, and I respected that in a way that almost annoyed me. I told Claire what Lena had sent me, word for word, and I heard her inhale like she was trying not to react too loudly. I told her about the balcony photo, the second glass, the empty hangers, the absence that felt rehearsed. I told her Lena had not asked, she had announced, and I said that a person who announces something like that is not confused about what they are doing. Claire was quiet for a moment, then she said something that made my throat tighten. She said Owen had always talked about Lena like she was unfinished business, like a chapter he could reopen whenever he was bored with his current life, and she said that was not romantic, it was predatory. She told me he had a habit of chasing women when he needed an ego boost, and she told me he had a habit of apologizing with gifts when the damage got visible. Then she said she was not calling to compare pain, she was calling to coordinate, because coordination was the only thing that turned chaos into consequence. Before we ended the call, she told me she had already booked a flight, and I laughed once, short and dry, because of course she had. Claire said she was going to Miami, not to fight in a lobby or throw a drink, but to make sure she saw what she needed to see with her own eyes, and to make sure she had something that did not rely on emotion or interpretation. She asked me if I was going to do something dramatic too, and I told her no, because drama makes you look guilty, even when you are not. I told her I was going to do something quiet, and she did not ask what, which made me like her even more. When I hung up, my phone immediately filled with new messages, and I finally stopped pretending I could ignore them forever. I opened Lena's thread and scrolled without responding, letting my eyes do the work while my face stayed calm. Lena had moved through phases like she was cycling through costumes. First she had been furious, calling me disgusting, calling me childish, calling me pathetic for involving Maya. Then she had been scared, asking what I was doing, asking who I was trying to hurt. Then she had been sweet, the sudden switch that always made me feel like I was standing in the wrong room. She said she loved me, she said she missed me, she said she did not want to fight, she said she would come home early if I would just stop. Stop what exactly was never specified, because she was not asking for peace, she was asking for control. There were also messages from Lena's mother, which arrived like a second wave of pressure, the kind that pretends to be concerned while quietly threatening your social standing. She asked if I was okay, then she asked what was going on, then she asked why I was humiliating the family, and the order of those questions told me everything about where her priorities lived. Then there were messages from a couple of mutual friends, vague and cautious, the kind of texts people send when they want information but do not want to choose sides. One friend wrote that Lena was saying I had snapped, and I stared at that word for a long moment, because snapped is what people say when they want to make your reaction the headline instead of the betrayal that caused it. I did not answer anyone yet. Instead, I did what I should have been doing all along, and I started keeping receipts, not the metaphorical kind, but the literal kind, because modern life leaves a paper trail for almost everything if you do not panic and delete it. I took screenshots of Lena's original message, the one that told me to relax. I took screenshots of the balcony photo and the timestamp. I took screenshots of her follow-up messages, especially the ones where she accused me of being unstable, because accusations are evidence when they reveal a pattern. Then I opened my phone's call log and took screenshots of the flood of calls, because the numbers themselves were a portrait of desperation. It felt clinical, and that was the point. If I let myself spiral, I would give Lena what she wanted, which was a messy emotional display she could package and sell to anyone who would listen. If I stayed clinical, I could see the shape of things, and the shape was ugly but clear. Lena had left with Owen expecting me to stay home like a loyal appliance, and when I did not behave correctly, she moved immediately to damage control. That is not love, that is management. Around 2 in the afternoon, Maya texted me, and her message was short enough to feel like fear. She said Lena had called her and screamed at her, and she said their mother had called too, asking if Maya was sleeping with me. Because in a family like that, reality is less important than the most dramatic version of it. Maya said she felt sick. She said she had not asked for this. And then she said something that made my chest tighten because it showed exactly how Lena's cruelty worked. Maya said Lena told her she was finally useful for something. I stared at that line until my vision blurred, and then I stood up so fast my chair scraped the floor. I was not angry in a loud way. I was angry in a way that made me feel calm, because the moment Lena turned Maya into collateral damage, she crossed a line that had nothing to do with marriage and everything to do with basic decency. Lena could disrespect me all she wanted, because I had chosen her once, and I could choose differently later. But Maya did not deserve to be used like a prop in a story she never wrote. I called Maya immediately, and when she answered, her voice sounded small. I told her she did not do anything wrong, and I told her she did not owe anyone an apology for standing in a hallway for 10 seconds. I told her Lena was panicking because Lena was losing control, and that the cruelty was not proof of Maya's guilt. It was proof of Lena's fear. Maya asked if I was going to divorce her sister, and I said I was not making announcements today, because announcements were Lena's style, not mine. I told her I was going to handle what needed to be handled, and I promised her one thing in a voice that surprised me with how steady it was. I told her I would not let Lena ruin her life to save her own image. After I hung up, I sat back down and looked at the evidence I had collected so far, and it hit me that I was holding the start of a story that could end in 2 ways. One way was the way Lena wanted, where I got emotional, said something messy, and gave her the excuse to paint me as the villain. The other way was quieter, where I let the truth do what it always does when it is documented, time-stamped, and placed in the right hands. I did not need to chase her to Miami. I did not need to yell into the phone. I needed to build a simple, undeniable timeline and let the people who cared about reputation stare at it until they could not look away. Then my phone buzzed again, and this time it was not Lena, not her mother, not a friend fishing for gossip. It was a photo from Claire, and the image made my stomach drop, because it was taken in a hotel lobby with a bright marble floor, and in the corner of the frame, half reflected in a mirror, were Lena and Owen standing too close, smiling like they were safe. Under the photo, Claire wrote a single sentence that felt like a door opening. She said she had found their room number. Claire's message sat there like a lit match on dry paper, and I read it twice because my brain did not want to accept that a hotel room number could exist in the world like a simple fact, neat and usable, when my life had been feeling like smoke and guesses for days. I did not call her back immediately, because calling would have pulled me into her adrenaline, and I needed my own head to stay quiet and sharp, the way a knife stays sharp by avoiding bad angles. Instead, I asked one question by text that mattered more than 10 emotional ones, and I asked it without punctuation drama, because drama is how people mistake noise for power. I asked her whether she had taken the photo herself, whether she had saved it with the timestamp visible, and whether she had anything that showed the hotel name without relying on her memory. She responded like a woman who had already learned the same lesson I was learning, and she sent me a cropped screenshot of the hotel's digital signage reflected in the marble, the the kind you would never notice unless you were looking for proof instead of comfort. Then she sent a second image, and that one made my teeth press together, because it showed Owen's name on a welcome screen near the front desk, the kind of screen that looks friendly and harmless until you realize it is an official record of someone being somewhere they claimed they were not. Under the screen, there was a line that suggested the hotel was hosting some conference, which was almost funny because liars love to borrow real events as camouflage. And it is never the events that fool you, it is your own willingness to believe. I stared at the images and felt my emotions trying to climb up into my throat, but I pushed them down because emotions are honest, but they are not always useful, and I needed useful more than honest right now. I told Claire she did not need to confront anyone, and I told her that if she was standing in a lobby, she should stay where there were cameras and staff and witnesses, because private confrontations are where people get injured. Not necessarily physically, but reputationally, and reputational injuries last longer than bruises. Claire replied that she had not come to scream, and she had not come to beg, and she had not come to play detective with shaky hands. She had come to collect facts like stones, and then throw them where they would do damage. I believed her because the tone in her messages had the same cold restraint I was forcing on myself, and restraint is the only thing that separates a plan from a tantrum. I asked if she had seen Lena's luggage, because luggage tells you whether someone is pretending, and Claire said she had not. But she had seen Lena wearing sandals that looked like they had been packed for pleasure, not for a harmless conference, and that small detail made my mind click into place like a latch. While Claire was in Miami, I was still in our kitchen, still staring at an empty space where Lena's coffee mug usually sat, and I realized something that was both obvious and humiliating. Lena had not only lied to me, she had designed the lie around what she thought my personality was, and she had done it with the confidence of someone who believed she knew me better than I knew myself. She thought I would take the insult and then fold back into the marriage, because folding was what kept her comfortable, and comfort was the only marriage vow she took seriously. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was my neighbor, Theo, the retired guy across the hall who always acted like the building was a little kingdom and he was the historian. Theo rarely texted me, which meant something had made him feel important enough to speak, and importance is a drug for certain personalities. His message was almost cheerful, which made it worse, because cheer is how people package gossip without admitting they love it. Theo wrote that a courier had dropped off a package earlier, and because the courier could not get an answer from my door, Theo had offered to keep it safe, like he was doing me a favor instead of inserting himself into my life. He said he had already brought it inside his unit, and he asked when I wanted it. The fact that he felt comfortable taking my mail made my skin tighten, but I swallowed my irritation, because irritation would not solve anything, and I suddenly suspected this package might be part of the same universe of lies. I walked across the hall, knocked, and watched Theo open the door with the expression of a man who thought he was about to be included in a scandal that would entertain him for weeks. He handed me a slim box with overnight shipping stickers and a printed label that made my pulse change because it was addressed to Lena, and it was from a boutique in Miami Beach. Theo leaned forward slightly, the way people do when they want to see your reaction up close, and he asked if everything was okay with Lena, as if he cared about her health instead of her drama. I told him everything was fine, because the fastest way to starve a gossip addict is to deprive him of details, and then I walked back into my apartment and locked the door with a deliberate click that sounded louder than it should have. The box felt light, but it also felt like a loaded statement, because overnight shipping from Miami is not something a woman orders for a harmless week of relaxing, unless she expects someone at home to notice and then accept a convenient excuse. I did not open it right away, because opening someone else's package can turn into a moral debate, and I was not in the mood for moral debates that were designed to distract me from Lena's choices. Instead, I photographed the shipping label, the tracking number, and the return address. Then I placed the box on the counter as if it were evidence, because in a way, it was. Then I called Maya, because Maya deserved to know if her sister was still using her as a shield, and because Maya's calm honesty was the only clean thing in this entire situation. Maya answered on the second ring, and her voice sounded like someone who had been trying to breathe shallow all day so she would not cry. She said Lena had called her again, and this time Lena was not screaming, she was pleading, because Lena's emotions were not real feelings. They were strategies that changed depending on the room. Maya said Lena wanted her to post a photo from last month, a family dinner picture, because Lena believed that if the internet saw Lena smiling near me, people would assume everything was stable and the rumors would dry up. Maya said she refused, and Lena told her she was ungrateful and disloyal, and then Lena promised she would make it up to her when she got home, which sounded like a threat dressed in perfume. I asked Maya where Lena claimed she was staying in Miami, and Maya hesitated, then admitted Lena had mentioned a hotel name once, casually, like a detail she did not think mattered. Maya said it was the Shoreline Grand, which made my chest go cold because the name matched the reflection in Claire's photo, and that meant the story had a spine now. I thanked Maya without softness, because softness might have made her think she needed to comfort me, and I did not want that weight on her. Then I told her something I meant in the most practical way possible. I told her Lena was going to try to turn Maya into a witness for her narrative, and I told her not to agree to anything, not to sign anything, not to post anything, and not to answer any just help me requests without thinking. Maya said she was scared of her family turning on her, and I told her families like hers turn on anyone who refuses to carry the lie, because the lie is the family's real religion. Maya got quiet, and then she said something that I did not expect, something that sounded like relief and sadness tangled together. She said she was glad Lena had replaced her last week because it proved what Maya had always felt but never had evidence for, which was that Lena only valued people when they were useful props in Lena's theater. Hearing Maya say it out loud made me feel a kind of anger that was cleaner than betrayal, because betrayal is personal and messy, but cruelty to your own sister is a pattern, and patterns can be predicted. After the call, I sat down and finally opened the box, because avoidance was starting to feel like cowardice, and cowardice is a luxury I did not have. Inside was a silk scarf with a designer tag, and beneath it was a handwritten note in neat, practiced cursive that made my eyes narrow immediately. The note did not say love, or miss you, or anything that belonged to a marriage. The note said, have fun. Holding the fort, you're so mature, and it ended with a smiley face that felt like a slap. I stared at that note until I felt oddly calm, because the note was not an accident, and it was not a mistake, and it was not the kind of thoughtless cruelty that happens when someone is stressed. It was deliberate, and deliberate cruelty is the clearest confession a person can offer. Lena had sent a gift to my own home as a way to claim territory, and the message was not just that she was in Miami with her ex, but that she believed I would stay and take it because she had trained me to. I photographed the note, the scarf, the packaging, and the boutique receipt tucked under the tissue paper because the receipt had a date and a time and a last 4 digits on the card used. The last 4 digits were not mine, which mattered because it meant someone else paid, and someone else paying for gifts to my home from Miami did not sound like harmless vacation. It sounded like a relationship that had already crossed from nostalgia into entitlement. As I was cataloging everything, Claire called me again, and this time her voice was lower and more controlled, which meant she was standing close to something volatile. She said she had followed them to the elevators from a distance, and she said she had not approached because she was not trying to create a scene that could be spun against her. She said she had seen Owen slip his keycard into the slot, and she said she had watched Lena step inside before the door closed, and she said she knew what I already knew, which was that any person who claims innocence while walking into a hotel room with an ex is insulting your intelligence on purpose. Then Claire said something that shifted the ground under the whole week. She said Owen was not alone in this because she had seen him speaking with a man in the lobby earlier, a man who looked like staff but did not wear a staff uniform, a man who kept glancing around like he was managing a problem. And she said that man had approached Owen first, not the other way around. Claire said she could be wrong, but she said it felt organized, like someone was overseeing the movement of certain guests, and the word organized made my mind go back to every time Lena had acted like trips and plans just happened without her effort. I asked Claire what the man looked like, and she described him in practical details, and one detail made my throat tighten because she mentioned a lapel pin with a stylized letter, the kind companies use for corporate event staff. Lena had mentioned, months ago, that her company was hosting a brand retreat in Miami, and I remembered it now the way you remember a smell right before something bad happens. I had assumed Lena was not involved because Lena always acted like she floated through life rather than arranged it, but that was one of her best tricks. Claire said she did not know what that meant, but she felt like Owen was not just on vacation, he was being handled. And she said that if Owen was being handled, then Lena was not simply cheating, she was coordinating something bigger. I did not tell Claire about the note yet because I wanted to confirm the payment method first, and because the note itself felt like a weapon Lena would deny. And denial is easier when you have not shown your hand. So I thanked Claire, told her to leave the hotel and stay safe, and I promised her I would send her something soon that would help her, not because I was trying to be noble, but because alliances are useful when the enemy thinks you are alone. When the call ended, I sat in my quiet apartment with the scarf and the note and the receipt, and I felt the story harden into something simple. Lena did not want forgiveness, and she did not want love, and she did not want peace. Lena wanted control, and she was willing to use her sister, her ex, her lies, and even my silence to keep it. I stared at the receipt again, then at the last 4 digits, and I opened my banking app because sometimes the truth is not in a confession, it is in a transaction. A new notification blinked at the top of the screen, and when I saw the merchant name, my mouth went dry, because the card that paid for the scarf was linked to a joint account that only one person should have been using in Miami. The notification was polite in the way machines are polite, which made it feel even more insulting, because it had no concept of marriage or betrayal or the small daily agreements people make when they share a life and a bank account. It simply displayed a merchant name, a city, and a dollar amount that was not catastrophic, not dramatic, and therefore far more dangerous, because small charges are how people learn to lie without fear. I stared at the screen until the numbers stopped looking like numbers and started looking like a trail, and then I did what I should have done the first time Lena ever called me mature, as if it were an excuse to disrespect me. I took a screenshot, then another screenshot with the time visible, then I opened the transaction details slowly, like I was handling something fragile that might disappear if I rushed. The merchant name matched the boutique printed on the receipt in the box, and the time on the charge matched the time on the receipt closely enough that it could not be explained away as coincidence, not unless the universe had suddenly become Lena's personal defense attorney. The card used was the joint account card, and that detail mattered more than the scarf, more than the note, and more than the smug little smiley face, because it meant Lena had moved from emotional betrayal into documented misuse, and documented misuse is the only language institutions take seriously. I did not rage, and I did not throw anything, and I did not pace around the apartment like a man auditioning for a role called Hurt Husband. I sat down, breathed through my nose, and started building something Lena could not charm her way out of. I opened the transaction history for the last 7 days and scrolled with the same attention I used when reviewing contracts at work, because that is what marriage becomes when one person decides it is a game. The list was not long, which told me she had been careful, but careful is not the same as smart, and smart people rarely need to be careful in the first place. There were 2 charges at airports, one charge that looked like a ride share, and one charge at a restaurant that made my stomach tighten, because it was the kind of restaurant where you do not grab a quick bite, you stage a memory. The restaurant charge was not enormous, but it was enough to imply cocktails and time and the kind of laughter Lena never saved for me anymore. I clicked into the restaurant line and found the timestamp, then I checked the time zone, because people forget that time zones exist, and the moment you forget time zones is the moment your alibi starts bleeding. I wrote the date and time on a legal pad, because paper has a weight that digital notes do not, and because if I ever needed to put this in front of someone else, I wanted the trail to feel intentional rather than reactive. I took another screenshot, then I saved the confirmation details that showed the location as Miami Beach. When I finished, I did not feel relief, and I did not feel power, not yet, because evidence is not power until you place it in a room where it changes decisions. The next step was obvious, but obvious steps are often the hardest, because they force you to act before your feelings catch up. I called the bank's customer service line, not to scream and not to accuse, but to ask specific questions in a voice that was calm enough to make the person on the other end take me seriously. I verified my identity, asked for recent transaction confirmation, and asked what options existed for limiting discretionary spending on a joint account without freezing essential bills. I was not asking for revenge in that moment, I was asking for a lever. The representative offered standard options that sounded like furniture assembly instructions, but I listened, asked for clarification, and chose the option that gave me control without alerting Lena immediately, because alerting her would have given her time to rehearse. When the call ended, I took a photo of the confirmation screen that showed the request was submitted, because in this story, everything needed a timestamp, even the steps I took to protect myself. Then I opened our shared email inbox on the laptop and searched for anything related to Miami, not by snooping in private messages, not by breaking into devices, but by using the same shared accounts we had always used for travel and bills. There was a thread from a travel site with the subject line that made my eyes narrow. An itinerary update, 2 passengers listed, and a hotel booking reference that did not match the hotel name Maya had told me. It was close enough to smell like the same property, but different enough to give Lena room to say the earlier name had been a mix-up. That was the first confirmation that she was running multiple versions of the truth in parallel, and parallel truths are what people build when they plan to deny right up until the moment denial fails. I opened the email details and saved the header information, then I printed the page and wrote the date on the back, because I wanted a physical copy that could not be accidentally deleted. As I was doing that, I noticed something else that would have seemed harmless in another life. The itinerary update had been sent from a corporate email domain, not a generic travel site, which meant someone in Lena's work ecosystem was involved, either to support her cover story or to use her for their own agenda. I messaged Claire with a simple question, because simple questions create clean answers, and clean answers are the building blocks of pressure. I asked whether Owen had mentioned a conference name, a brand event, or a corporate retreat, and I asked whether she had seen any badges in the lobby. Claire responded a few minutes later with a photo she had taken discreetly from her car, the hotel's event board visible through the glass, the kind of board that looks like boring logistics until it becomes a map. The board listed a Crestline Partners Leadership Week, and even if that meant nothing to Claire, it meant something to me, because I had heard Lena mention Crestline months ago in passing, the way she mentioned things when she wanted credit for being in the room without having to explain why. I checked Lena's social media out of habit, not because I expected a confession, but because people who betray you still crave the theater of being admired. Her story was empty, which was unusual for her, because Lena loved posting polished moments that made her life look effortless, and the absence felt like a sign of strategy. Then I checked who she had recently followed, because follow lists are the digital equivalent of leaving footprints in wet cement, and there it was, a new follow. Crestline Partners. It was not proof on its own, but it was a thread that matched the event board, and threads become ropes when you collect enough of them. I called Maya again, and this time I did not ask her to comfort me or take sides, because comfort is a trap, and sides are how families start wars. I asked her if Lena had ever talked about Crestline, and Maya sighed in a way that sounded like she was tired of being surprised by her own sister. She said Lena had been obsessed with Crestline people lately, that Lena talked about them as if proximity to their logo was a career move, and that she had hinted she was being noticed. Maya said Lena also mentioned Owen in the same breath once, as if Owen's presence was convenient rather than romantic, and that detail mattered because convenience is often the real motive behind affairs that look passionate from the outside. After I ended the call, I looked at the boutique receipt again and noticed something I had missed the first time, because anger makes you scan and calm makes you read. The receipt had a membership number at the bottom, a loyalty program code that was not Lena's handwriting and not my name, but it was a data point. I searched that code in the shared email inbox, and within seconds I found a welcome email from the boutique dated 2 months earlier, addressed not to Lena, but to Lena Harper, CO Crestline Partners Event Services. The email was not hidden, not encrypted, not protected by any cinematic plot device. It was simply sitting there, ignored, because no one expects the truth to be boring. That email changed the shape of the whole week, because it suggested Lena had been cultivating Miami and Crestline long before she texted me to relax. It also suggested she had access through event services, which meant she could move around hotel spaces with plausible authority, and plausible authority is how people do inappropriate things in public without being questioned. I printed the email, placed it in a clear sleeve, and wrote the date and context on the paper like a man building a case file, because in a way, that was exactly what I was doing. I was not trying to punish Lena in some loud, messy way. I was trying to make her lies collapse under their own weight. The front door buzzed, and for a moment my stomach tightened, because betrayal trains you to expect the worst at every sound. It was Theo again, texting me from across the hall as if we were friends, asking whether I had opened the package and whether Lena was doing okay in Miami, because he could not help himself. I did not answer him immediately. Instead, I stared at his message and realized that even in my own building, Lena's choices were already creating pressure, because people like Theo do not need proof, they need a hint, and then they do the rest for free. I typed back something bland and closed, telling him she was fine, and then I saved the message thread anyway, because it showed something I might need later, the timeline of when the package arrived, and the fact that someone else had handled it. That was not evidence of cheating, but it was evidence of exposure, and exposure is part of the punishment Lena feared more than any legal document. Then I went back to my desk and laid out my materials in a line. The scarf receipt, the bank screenshots, the itinerary email, the boutique loyalty email, Claire's event board photo, and the handwritten note that now looked less like a taunt and more like a signature. I was halfway through creating a simple ledger on paper when my phone lit up with an incoming call from an unknown number, and unknown numbers are rarely good news in a week like this. I answered anyway, because avoidance is another kind of surrender, and the voice on the other end introduced herself as someone from Crestline's event services team, asking if she had reached Lena's husband. The way she said husband had the careful politeness of someone who had already been warned that this might be sensitive, and sensitivity is usually code for, we know something happened. She explained, in a controlled and professional tone, that there had been a misunderstanding involving guest lists and account charges, and that she was trying to confirm details so the company could correct records. She did not accuse Lena directly, and she did not mention Owen, but she mentioned the hotel and she mentioned the dates, and every word she chose sounded like a company trying to protect itself from a mess. I asked what prompted the call, and she hesitated just long enough to tell me the truth without saying it plainly. She said a complaint had been submitted by another guest, and the guest had requested that Crestline review who authorized the arrangements. I thanked her, told her I would respond by email, and asked her to send her request in writing, because written requests create written trails, and written trails create consequences. When the call ended, I stared at my phone for a long moment, feeling something cold and steady settle into place. This was no longer just my marriage collapsing in private. This had reached an institutional hallway where policies mattered and where Lena's charm would not work the same way. I opened my notes, wrote down the caller's name, the time, and the core request. Then I looked at the evidence line on my desk and saw the next step like a door swinging open. Lena was not only in Miami. She was inside a corporate event structure, and someone else had already pulled an alarm cord. I did not need to chase her. I only needed to be ready when the building started filling with smoke. I picked up the printed itinerary, read the hotel reference number again, and realized the last 4 digits matched the bank transaction page in a way that could not be accidental. Lena had used our joint account not just for a scarf, but for access, and access is where careers live or die. I set my pen down, breathed once, and decided that when Lena tried to come home with her version of the story, I would not argue with her. I would ask for one detail, and I would let the recorded world answer for her. My phone buzzed again with a new email notification, and when I saw the subject line, I felt my pulse slow into something almost satisfied, because it was from Crestline, and it said, in plain professional language, that a review had been opened and that documentation could be submitted. The email from Crestline was written in the same neutral tone banks use when they warn you that your card has been compromised, which was almost funny because my card had not been compromised at all. It had been used exactly as intended, just not by someone who respected what the word joint was supposed to mean. I read the message twice, not because it was complicated, but because it was the first official sign that Lena's little week-long reset was already costing her something she could not flirt her way out of. The subject line was dry, the body was courteous, and the attachment list was empty, which meant they were inviting me to fill it with gravity. I did not rush to reply, because rushing is what people do when they still believe they can win by emotion. I opened my evidence sleeve, laid the printed pages in a new order, and made myself a rule. Every response I sent would be clean, factual, and timed like a metronome, because timing is how you turn suspicion into consensus. I drafted a short email that confirmed I was Lena's spouse, confirmed the joint account was mine, and asked which specific records Crestline needed to correct. I attached only 2 items on purpose, because dumping everything at once makes you look frantic, and frantic people get handled, not respected. I attached the bank transaction screenshot with the timestamp visible and the itinerary update that listed 2 passengers. Then I waited for the reply while my apartment stayed too quiet, as if the walls were holding their breath. The worst part of betrayal is not the rage. Rage is honest. The worst part is the awkward stillness when you realize your life has been altered by someone else's appetite, and you are now the one who has to do the paperwork. I stood by the kitchen counter and stared at the fridge magnets we had collected on trips we used to take together, the kind that promised we would be the couple who still laughed in airports, and I wondered how many of those magnets had been purchased on days she was already practicing her new voice, the one that sounded soothing while it moved you out of the way. My phone buzzed again, not an email this time, but a notification from the group chat I had muted months ago because it was mostly coworkers sharing photos of lunch and pretending that counted as community. Someone had posted a joke about Miami being where vows go to die, and the timing was so sharp it felt personal, even though it probably wasn't. The message had a handful of reactions, and I could already see the pattern forming in my mind. A rumor becomes a joke becomes a story, and a story becomes a decision people make about you before you even enter the room. Lena loved rooms. She loved the way people looked at her when she walked in, like she was a pleasant surprise. I had always been the one who made sure we got invited. I called Maya because I needed her voice, not for comfort, but for calibration. She answered quickly, which told me she had been waiting for me to call again, the way people do when they know they are part of something they did not choose. I told her about the Crestline email and the complaint, and I listened as she inhaled, then exhaled, like she was forcing herself not to defend Lena out of muscle memory. Maya asked what I wanted her to do, and I told her I wanted her to do nothing that felt like betrayal to herself, because I was not in the business of turning family into collateral unless family volunteered. There was a pause, then she said something I did not expect, which was that Lena had been calling her too much this week, asking weird questions, fishing for reassurance, acting like she was trying to rehearse how a story would land before she told it. Maya said Lena sounded excited and nervous at the same time, and that combination was familiar to me, because it was the same tone Lena used when she had lied about being late to our engagement dinner and later admitted she had stopped to buy a dress because she wanted to look expensive. Maya told me Lena kept saying the trip was harmless, that Owen was a closed chapter, and that I was too calm, which was Lena's way of admitting she was afraid of what my calm meant. When I hung up, I stared at the message thread with Lena that had been mostly quiet since her last relax text. There is a specific cruelty in the word relax when it comes from someone actively creating chaos. It is not advice. It is an attempt to place you beneath them, like a dog being told to sit while the owner opens the door. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too, and finally decided that words were not the right weapon. Words invite debate, and debate is where liars thrive, because debate creates the illusion that two versions of reality deserve equal time. That was when I remembered something Maya had said earlier, half joking, half bitter, about Lena believing no one could replace her, because replacement would require admitting she was ordinary. I had laughed at the time, but now the thought landed differently, like a tool being set on the table. Lena did not fear divorce as much as she feared being forgettable. She feared the image of me moving on calmly more than she feared any formal consequence, because formal consequences could be framed as drama, and drama still centered her. Being replaced did not. I texted Maya and asked if she could come over for 15 minutes because I needed to talk face to face and because certain moments need witnesses, even if the witness is only a memory later. She arrived wearing a coat that looked like she had thrown it on without thinking, and her eyes went immediately to the papers on my desk, the receipts and printouts laid out like a small courtroom. She did not touch anything, but I watched her read with her face, the way her expression tightened when she recognized details, the way her mouth hardened when she saw the 2-passenger line on the itinerary. Maya asked me what I was planning, and I told her I was planning to stop being the man Lena treated like furniture. I told her I was planning to make every lie expensive, not with screaming, not with threats, but with small, documented truths that other people could not ignore. Maya looked at me for a long moment, then she said she was tired of watching Lena make everyone around her feel like an accessory. She did not say she wanted revenge. She said she wanted it to stop. I asked Maya for one thing, and I made it clear she could say no without consequence. I asked if she would help me send a message that did not contain a single insult, not a single accusation, just a picture and a line that would hit Lena in the one place she protected hardest. Maya stared at me, then asked what kind of picture. I did not answer immediately, because the answer would sound ugly if spoken out loud, but the truth was simple. I wanted Lena to feel, for one sharp second, what I had been feeling all week, which was that the world did not pause for her comfort. Maya's jaw tightened, and I saw her wrestle with her own pride, her loyalty, and the fact that Lena's loyalty had always been conditional. Finally, Maya said she would do it if I promised two things, that I would not humiliate her personally, and that I would not let Lena weaponize this against her later. I promised, because my point was not to destroy Maya's life. My point was to puncture Lena's fantasy that she could disappear for a week and return to a home that waited like a loyal dog. We went into the living room where the light was better, because if you are going to set a trap, you do not do it in bad lighting like an amateur. Maya sat on the couch and rolled her eyes in a way that tried to pretend this was stupid, but her hands were tense in her lap. I sat beside her, close enough to imply intimacy without turning it into something grotesque, and I lifted my phone. For a second, I hesitated, because I could see how this might look to anyone who did not know the context, and I hated that I had been pushed into thinking like a marketer rather than a husband. Then I remembered Lena's relax, and the hesitation burned away. I took the selfie. In the frame, Maya's face was neutral, my expression was calm, and my arm was around her shoulders in the clean, obvious way that implied comfort and replacement without showing anything explicit. The photo did not need to be sexy. It needed to be symbolic. I checked it once, then I typed the line I had already rehearsed in my head, because the most effective cruelty is often the simplest sentence. I wrote, "Relax. No one is waiting. You have already been replaced." I sent it before I could overthink it, because overthinking is how you give your enemy time to recover. For 10 seconds, nothing happened, and the silence felt like the pause between lightning and thunder. Then my phone lit up with the first notification. Lena had seen the message. 1 second later, the typing bubbles appeared, disappeared, appeared again like a heart monitor spike. Then came the first call, then another. Then the messages started arriving so fast the screen looked like it was raining. Maya stared at the phone as if it were a live animal, and I could feel her anger rising, not at me, but at the fact that Lena's first instinct was not to ask what happened, but to demand control back immediately. I did not answer the calls. I did not read the messages right away. I let the panic build on Lena's side because panic makes people sloppy, and sloppiness creates new proof. Then, as if the universe wanted to be dramatic, my email refreshed with a new message from Kreslin. This time, it contained a case reference number and a request for a short call the next morning with their compliance lead and the hotel's event manager. They asked me to confirm whether the joint account had been used with my consent for any business-related charges, and they asked whether I would be willing to provide supporting documentation for record accuracy. Record accuracy. That phrase made me smile in a way that surprised even me. Maya looked at my face and asked what it was. I told her Kreslin was opening a review with names in the room. Maya's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed, and she let out a short, humorless laugh, because she understood what that meant. Lena loved rooms until the room had minutes. Lena loved stories until the story had attachments. The phone kept buzzing. Somewhere in Miami, Lena was holding her own device with shaking hands, trying to figure out how to put the lid back on a week of choices that suddenly felt heavier. I finally opened one of her messages, not to respond, but to see what her panic was revealing. The first thing she typed was not an apology. It was not even a question. It was an accusation about Maya, which told me everything I needed to know about how Lena's mind worked under pressure. And it told me something else, too. She was scared enough to start burning bridges without checking whether the fire would spread. I put the phone down, looked at Maya, and told her she could go home now if she wanted, because the message had already done its job. Maya stood slowly, as if she had just stepped out of a storm she did not know she was walking into, and she asked me quietly what I was going to do next. I looked at the evidence on my desk, then at the Kreslin email, then at Lena's missed calls stacked like a countdown, and I told Maya the truth. I was going to let Lena talk herself into the record. By morning, the apartment felt less like a home and more like a staging area, because once you start collecting proof, you stop seeing rooms as places to relax, and start seeing them as places where time leaves fingerprints. I woke up to a silent phone that had finally burned through Lena's panic battery overnight. But the quiet did not soothe me, because quiet after a storm is just debris settling. I made coffee I barely tasted, then sat at the table with the evidence sleeve open like a thin mouth, and I reread Kreslin's email until every polite phrase sounded like a judge clearing their throat. The call was scheduled for 10, which gave me 2 hours to do what I do best when someone tries to make me look irrational. I build a timeline that does not argue, it only exists. I printed the itinerary update again, not because I needed a second copy, but because printed paper changes how people behave, since screens feel like opinions and paper feels like decisions. I placed the transaction screenshot next to it. Then I added the one thing I had not shown Kreslin yet, which was the merchant notification chain that started the moment Lena landed and kept going as if my account had become her vacation diary. Each alert was small by itself, a ride here, a tab there, a service fee, that sounded innocent until you lined them up and realized innocence does not travel in a pack. At 9:20, my phone buzzed with a message from Maya that was short for her, which meant she was trying to keep her emotions from spilling into text. She said Lena had called her again at 3 a.m., crying and furious at the same time, saying she was being punished for nothing, saying I was humiliating her, saying Maya was a snake, and then, in the same breath, begging Maya to tell me to stop. The contradiction made my jaw tighten because it was Lena's oldest trick, the one where she threw knives and then asked for bandages. I told Maya she did not have to answer another call, and I meant it, because the last thing I needed was for Lena to turn her sister into a secondary battlefield, and then pretend she was the victim of family betrayal. At 9:45, I walked into my office spare room, the one Lena used to call my little bunker, with that playful voice that always carried an edge of contempt, as if any man who prepared for outcomes was secretly pathetic. I set my laptop on the desk, arranged the pages in a clean stack, and wrote a short script on a notepad that contained no anger, no sarcasm, and no plea, just the order of facts I wanted to land. It was almost funny how much self-control betrayal teaches you, because the man you become afterward is often the man you should have been before, if you had not been distracted by love. At exactly 10, the call started, and I heard 3 voices, each with a slightly different shade of professional caution, the way people sound when they have already formed a suspicion but still need permission to say it out loud. The compliance lead introduced herself with the kind of calm that comes from spending years listening to lies dressed up as explanations, and the hotel event manager sounded tired, which told me he had already dealt with someone else's messy choices this week. They asked me to confirm my identity, confirm my relationship to Lena, and confirm whether I'd authorized the charges connected to the room block and the incident report reference number they had attached. I answered the questions simply because simple answers are harder to twist, and I gave them the timeline as if I were reading the weather. I told them the date Lena left, the date the itinerary changed to 2 passengers, the time the first merchant alert hit, and the fact that I had not been informed of any shared business purpose for those charges. I did not describe Lena as unfaithful, because that would make it personal, and personal makes professionals back away. I described the financial behavior as inconsistent with shared consent, and I described the communications as manipulative, because manipulative is a word that lives comfortably inside policy language. The compliance lead asked whether I believed the second passenger was Lena's ex, and I felt the first real test of the day, because this is where most people either ram into the truth like a drunk driver or swerve into vagueness and lose credibility. I told her I could not certify the identity of the second passenger based purely on the itinerary, but I could certify that Lena had told me she was traveling with her ex, that she had framed it as harmless, and that her behavior after receiving my message suggested she understood there was something to hide. The hotel manager cleared his throat, and when he spoke again, his tone had changed, because he had heard thousands of couples fight in lobbies, and he knew what fear sounded like. He said there had been an argument at the hotel restaurant between two women, that the staff had separated them quickly, and that the complaint was not about violence so much as harassment and public embarrassment. He said one of the women had called the other a liar, had demanded the room number, had accused the hotel of enabling an affair, and had threatened to escalate the issue through the hotel's corporate channels. He also said, carefully, that the male guest accompanying Lena had tried to intervene, and that his name was attached to a bar tab that did not match the payment method on file, which meant there were two streams of money moving through the same night. The compliance lead asked if I knew the other woman's identity, and I said I did not, but I could guess, and guessing was not what we were doing today. Then she asked if I would be willing to submit a written statement for their case file describing the lack of authorization and the sequence of messages that followed, and I told her yes, because written statements are where liars choke. She gave me an internal case number and a deadline, and she said, in that gentle corporate tone, that Kreslin would be placing temporary restrictions on discretionary spending from the joint account until the review was complete, and that Lena would be notified. When the call ended, I sat still for a long moment, because I could feel the shift in power without even seeing it. Lena would get the notification in Miami, not from me, not from Maya, but from the system, and systems do not care about tears. I could already imagine her sitting somewhere bright and expensive, staring at her phone with that stunned look she used when the world refused to play along with her narrative. I did not feel joy, exactly, because joy is too warm a word for what I felt. What I felt was alignment, the clean click of a lock turning, the small relief of knowing the story was no longer hers to edit. I emailed my written statement immediately, because speed after preparation reads like confidence, and I attached only what I needed: the itinerary update, the transaction line, and a screenshot of Lena's "Relax, I will be home in a week" message, because that was the line that framed her absence as something I was supposed to accept like a polite inconvenience. I did not attach my selfie with Maya, because that was my personal lever, not the bank's evidence, and I refused to let Lena drag my work into the dirt with her. I ended the statement with one line asking for confirmation of receipt, because people who are lying hate being asked to confirm anything. After I hit send, my phone rang again, and this time it was Lena. Not a spam number, not a missed call after midnight, but a direct call in broad daylight, which meant she had received the restriction notification and realized her week was no longer a vacation. It was a consequence. I let it ring out, because answering would give her a stage, and I was done building stages for her. She followed with a message that was longer than her usual. The kind of message that tries to sound reasonable by using too many words, and even without opening it, I could feel the structure: blame, denial, emotional bait, then a sudden offer to talk like adults. Instead of responding, I opened the shared calendar on my laptop because I remembered something that had bothered me for months: a pattern of quick coffees and committee meetings that always seemed to land in the same time slots, always just inconvenient enough that I had stopped questioning them. I searched the calendar for Miami, then for Owen's name, and found nothing, which was not surprising because Lena did not store guilt in shared spaces. Then I searched for a local venue name that had appeared in one of the merchant alerts, and I found an appointment on the day before she left that was labeled dress fitting, a label so casual it almost made me laugh. The appointment was 2 hours long, and the location field was blank, which meant it was meant for her, not for us. I exported the week view as a PDF and saved it, then I compared it to the merchant alert timestamps I had printed, and the overlaps started to show like bruises. If the itinerary had changed before she left, then the story had been decided before the goodbye kiss, and that meant the harmless framing was not optimism, it was strategy. I thought about the way she had packed, the way she had avoided eye contact, the way she had kissed my cheek like I was a relative, and I realized she had not been leaving for a week. She had been leaving me behind on purpose. The doorbell camera app on my phone still had the clip from the morning she left, and I watched it once, not because I needed to see her again, but because timestamps do not lie even when people do. The camera showed her dragging her suitcase out, pausing at the doorway to adjust her sunglasses, and then smiling at someone off-frame in a way she never smiled at me anymore. A small private smile that felt like a signature. She stepped out, and a shadow moved near the edge of the frame, close enough to suggest company, far enough to deny it, and that was Lena's whole life lately, always standing at the edge of proof. Or I saved the still frame with the time visible and added it to the folder. Then I typed one short note to myself on the notepad. He was there before Miami. It was not proof of identity, but it was proof of intent, and intent is what separates a mistake from a plan. I placed the note inside the sleeve, and I realized I was no longer collecting evidence to confront Lena, because confronting her would only create noise. I was collecting evidence to confront the world she had been using as a shield, the friends, the workplace, the polite institutions that always assume the smiling woman is the reasonable one. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was a notification from an unknown number with a Miami area code, a message that was short and sharp, the kind of message a furious spouse sends when they finally connect the dots. It said she needed to talk to me, that she knew who I was, and that Lena had been lying to both of us. I stared at the screen for a long moment, because this was not a threat. It was an opening, and openings are dangerous because they can lead to truth or to chaos. I did not reply right away, because the next move mattered, and I wanted Lena to keep thinking she could still steer this with tears. Then I saved the number, labeled it only as Miami Wife, and I felt something cold settle into place, the kind of cold that does not numb you but steadies you. If she was reaching out to me now, it meant Lena's week was collapsing faster than she could rebuild the lie, and it meant the next piece of the story was already walking toward me, whether I invited it or not. I opened Lena's long message at last, read it once, and noticed how she never once said the trip was over, never once said she was coming home early, never once said she was sorry in a way that included a fact. Then I looked back at the new Miami number, and I understood, with a clarity that made my stomach tighten, that Lena had not just risked our marriage, she had stepped into someone else's marriage too, and the woman on the other side was done playing nice. I waited 30 minutes before I answered the Miami number, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I wanted to be deliberate, and because the moment you rush into someone else's panic, you inherit their chaos. When I finally texted back, I kept it narrow and clean, asking who she was and what she had in writing, because feelings don't survive scrutiny, and I needed something that would. Her reply came fast, and it came like a clenched fist, saying her name was Dana, saying she was legally married to Owen Callis, saying Owen had told her he was going to Miami alone for space, and saying she had now watched that story collapse in real time, because she had seen a tagged story with Lena's face in the background and then watched it disappear as if deleting it could delete the truth. We moved to a call, and the first thing I noticed was how controlled her voice was for someone who had been hit with a public betrayal, because she sounded like a woman who had already cried herself empty and was now operating on pure anger and clarity. She told me she had not reached out to me to beg, and she had not reached out to me to negotiate because she was done with both of those roles, and what she wanted was alignment. A simple exchange that would prevent Owen and Lena from rewriting the same lie twice in two different homes. I told her I had no interest in revenge fantasies, only in consequences that could survive daylight, and she gave a dry laugh that sounded like she had said the same sentence to herself a dozen times that day. Dana explained what she had, and as she listed it, I realized she had been collecting her own evidence without even meaning to, because life leaves receipts whether you ask for them or not. She had a screenshot of Owen's itinerary email subject line that said itinerary updated, and she had the passenger line visible because Owen had opened it on their shared laptop, then panicked and closed it too late. She had a merchant alert from their bank that showed a Miami hotel restaurant charge at a time Owen claimed he was walking on the beach alone, and she had a photo from a friend's social feed where a couple posed near a neon sign, with Lena's blonde hair and familiar posture caught in the corner like an accidental confession. She did not tell me she knew they had slept together, and she did not need to, because the timeline already made intimacy the most boring part of the story, and the deception the main event. I told her what I had, and I kept it equally factual, describing the joint account alerts, the itinerary update, the doorbell timestamp from the morning Lena left, and the sudden flood of calls that had hit my phone after I sent my selfie with Maya because those calls were proof of panic, and panic is proof that someone believes you can hurt them. Dana went quiet when I mentioned the selfie, not because she judged me, but because she understood the leverage, and she said, almost calmly, that Lena had played a dangerous game by involving her sister, because now there was a witness inside the family who could not be painted as a jealous husband's friend. I told her Maya had not been involved willingly, and Dana said she believed me, then added that belief was worthless unless it was backed by something that could be forwarded, printed, and filed. We agreed to swap only what we needed, and we agreed to keep it in writing, because voice calls can be denied and texts can be saved, and because both of us had spouses who relied on slippery interpretations. Dana sent me a folder link that contained only images and PDFs, nothing dramatic, nothing edited, just the raw artifacts of a lie, and I felt my jaw tighten again when I saw the itinerary screenshot with 2 passenger names. Because the second name was not ambiguous anymore. It was Owen Callis, typed in clean airline font, sitting next to Lena's name like an insult that had been neatly formatted for convenience. I saved the files to my own folder, then I printed the itinerary page and wrote the date and time on the back, because paper has weight and I wanted every step to feel heavier than Lena's excuses. After the call, I walked through the apartment with new eyes, because every object became a question, when you know the answer is hiding somewhere in plain sight. Lena's closet still held the gap where her suitcase had been, and her jewelry dish held the absence of the watch she only wore when she wanted attention, the one she claimed was too flashy for daily life, until she suddenly needed to be seen. On the kitchen counter, a small stack of mail had shifted, and I noticed a folded brochure for a travel clinic tucked beneath a grocery coupon, the kind of thing a person hides when they want to pretend the trip was spontaneous. I did not feel like a detective, because I was not solving a mystery. I was documenting a decision, and there is a difference that matters when someone later tries to call you paranoid. My phone buzzed again, and this time it was a notification from Crestlane confirming they had received my statement and opened a review, and the wording was as polite as ever, but the subtext was clear. Lena's ability to spend freely was now being watched. Almost immediately after, Lena called again, and again I let it ring, because she wanted a conversation she could twist, and I wanted a record she could not. She followed with a message that tried to sound reasonable, saying she did not understand why I was doing this, saying I was embarrassing her, saying her trip had nothing to do with Owen's marriage, and that last line was so specific it might as well have been a confession. People don't deny the exact thing you did not accuse them of unless that exact thing is already burning a hole through their story. I wrote back only one sentence, long and calm, telling her that I would communicate through text only and that any financial and travel-related clarifications needed to be in writing because we were now in a phase where clarity mattered more than comfort. She replied with a burst of anger that contained no facts, then pivoted into a softer tone that tried to hook me with nostalgia, saying she missed home, saying she felt attacked, saying she wanted us to reset. I read it twice, and I noticed she still did not say she was coming back early, and she still did not explain why her itinerary had 2 passengers, and she still did not explain why another wife was now contacting me like we were allied attorneys instead of strangers. I texted Dana again, telling her I had confirmed Owen's name on the itinerary, and she responded with a single line that sounded like someone tightening a seatbelt. She said Owen was now claiming Lena was only a friend who happened to be in Miami, which was the kind of lie that collapses as soon as you place it beside a shared itinerary. Dana said she had asked him, calmly, why his solo trip had 2 seats, and he had responded by accusing her of spying, which was always the move of men who confuse being observed with being persecuted. She asked if I was willing to let her reference my Crestline review case number as proof that my household had also escalated this beyond private arguing, and I told her yes, because institutional pressure is the only kind of pressure liars respect. That afternoon, Maya came home earlier than usual, and I could tell by the way she set her bag down that she had been carrying tension like a backpack full of stones. She told me Lena had sent her a barrage of messages, swinging between threats and tears, and that Lena had called her a traitor for even answering me that first night. Maya looked at me with a strange mix of guilt and relief, and she asked quietly what I was planning to do, because she did not want revenge, but she also did not want to be used as a pawn. I told her my plan was simple, and that simplicity was my only mercy, because I was not trying to destroy Lena's life. I was trying to stop Lena from destroying everyone else's reality. I showed Maya the printed itinerary page with Owen's name, and I watched her face change as the last bit of denial drained out. Because it is one thing to suspect a sister's betrayal and another thing to see it typed by an airline. Maya swallowed hard, then said she had something I might need, something Lena had left behind while packing in a rush, and she went to her room and returned with a small cloth pouch, the kind Lena used for jewelry when she traveled. Inside the pouch was a coat check ticket stub from a charity event Lena had attended 2 weeks earlier, and on the back of it, in Lena's handwriting, was a phone number with the name Owen, written beside it like a secret too ordinary to fear. Maya said she had found it under the couch cushion after Lena had been sprawled there pretending to nap, and she had kept it because it felt wrong, but she had not known what it meant until now. I did not celebrate because celebrating would make Maya feel dirtier, and she did not deserve that. So I simply photographed the stub beside today's date on my phone and saved it into the same evidence folder because the artifact mattered more than the emotion. I thanked Maya, and I told her she did not have to carry this anymore because carrying secrets is how families rot from the inside. Maya nodded, then said something that made my stomach tighten in a different way because she said Lena had been talking for months about starting over, about finding a life with more spark. And she had said it with the casual cruelty of someone who believes boredom is a valid reason to burn a house down. That evening, I got another message from Dana, and this one was different because it contained a screenshot of a hotel folio summary line showing payer name and checkout date, with no room details, just the parts that mattered, and she said the front desk had confirmed Owen's card was not the primary payment method on file, which meant Owen had been paying for moments while Lena had been using my account for the base. It was a petty little division of costs, the kind cheaters pretend is practical, but it was also a map of responsibility, and responsibility is what you need when you want consequences that do not drift into rumor. Lena called again, and this time she left a voice message, and I did not listen to it, because I did not need her voice to poison my focus, but I did take a screenshot of the timestamp showing when it was left, because timestamps are the silent witnesses nobody can intimidate. I saved it into the folder, then I wrote one more line on my notepad, not for drama, but for discipline. They are coordinating stories because the truth is already outpacing them. I looked at the growing stack of paper, the printed itinerary, the alerts, the doorbell still, the coat check stub, and I realized part of Lena's panic was not that she had been caught, but that she had been caught in a way she could not charm her way out of. I went to bed late, not because I was sleepless, but because I was methodical, and method takes time when you refuse shortcuts. Before I turned the light off, I checked the shared calendar one more time, and I saw a new entry appear, created from Lena's account, labeled Couples Counseling Intake Call, scheduled for next week, as if she could book a future and force me to live inside it. I stared at that entry for a long moment, then exported the week view again, because even desperation leaves evidence, and I saved the PDF like a bookmark in a book I no longer wanted to read. Then I opened Dana's last message, looked at the folio line one more time, and understood the shape of what was coming next. Because once two households share the same liar, the liar runs out of rooms to hide in, and all that is left is a public place where the story has to stand upright or fall. By morning, the apartment felt like a stage after the actors left, with props still standing and the silence pretending it was neutral. And I moved through it like a man counting exits because I already knew the room was about to fill with smoke. I made coffee I did not taste, watched the steam rise like a soft lie, and checked my phone the way people check wounds, not for pain, but for changes that mean you are bleeding internally. Lena had sent 3 messages overnight, all different tones, all the same goal, each one trying to drag me back into the private arena where she could manage my emotions, because public truth was the one thing she could not negotiate with. I kept my replies minimal, and I kept them in writing, because I wanted a chain of calm sentences that made her look unhinged by contrast, which is not cruelty, it is optics. And optics are the currency she chose when she boarded a plane with her ex and called it harmless. The new angle she tried was motherhood, even though we did not have a child, because people who run out of facts start borrowing identities, and she wrote as if we had a fragile little world that needed saving, as if I was the reckless one, as if her week in Miami was a wellness retreat and not a collision between 2 marriages. I did not correct her narrative in full, because correcting a liar is like arguing with fog, and fog only thickens when you swing at it. Instead, I focused on the work that could not be undone with a sigh or a cry. I opened the shared folder I had created, labeled it with the date, and placed each artifact into a simple structure that would make sense to a stranger, because if the truth ever needed a witness, the witness would not be my feelings. The itinerary screenshot went first, then the merchant alert, then the doorbell still frame, then the coat check stub Maya had found, then the exported calendar week view with Lena's sudden couples counseling intake call, sitting there like a hostage note. I wrote short captions beneath each file name, not dramatic captions, not revenge captions, just the plain description of what it was and why it mattered, because clarity is what makes deception look stupid. Dana called during my commute, and her voice sounded sharper than last night, like a knife that had been honed on disappointment. She told me Owen had tried to preempt her, telling his family that she was having a breakdown, that she was imagining things, and that she had been jealous for years, which meant he was building a soft landing for his own crash. She told me his sister had reached out to her with a gentle, patronizing message about protecting the marriage, and Dana said she could almost hear Owen writing it in the background, because it had that clean, rehearsed tone of a man who thinks he can outsource reality. I asked her what she wanted from me, and she said she wanted a coordinated timeline. Nothing more, because if they were going to lie, they would lie in the same rhythm, and she wanted to break that rhythm in public. We agreed to one thing that made sense to both of us, which was to stop treating this as two separate disasters and start treating it as one shared pattern. Dana said she was filing a formal complaint through Owen's workplace ethics channel, because he worked in a professional environment that cared about policy more than passion, and she did not have to prove adultery to prove misconduct. She told me she had a case intake number already, and she was willing to share it if I was willing to share mine from Crestline, because 2 official numbers in 2 institutions is the difference between gossip and gravity. I gave her the Crestline review reference, and she gave me hers, and for a moment we were not 2 betrayed spouses. We were 2 adults building a fence around a fire. At work, I kept my face normal and my voice steady, because if Lena wanted to paint me as unstable, the best revenge was to become boring. My phone stayed in my pocket, but my mind kept scanning for the weak points in Lena's story, because she had always been careless with details when she assumed charm would cover the cracks. At lunch, I received an email from Crestline's compliance team acknowledging my submission and requesting any supporting documentation that showed suspicious travel or discretionary spending patterns. And I almost laughed, because Lena had always treated money like background noise, but now the noise had turned into a siren. I forwarded them the merchant alert and the itinerary update header, keeping it tight and factual. Then I saved the sent email as a PDF with headers visible, because it mattered that I could prove what I provided and when I provided it. When I got home, Maya was already there, sitting at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a glass of water like she was trying to keep herself from shaking. She told me Lena had called her twice, then sent a voice note that lasted almost 4 minutes, and it was mostly rage disguised as heartbreak. Maya said Lena accused her of betraying the family, then pivoted to begging, then pivoted again to threatening to tell their parents that Maya had been flirting with my husband, because that was the kind of lie that lands well in families that value appearances over nuance. I listened without interrupting, and I told Maya the truth she needed, which was that Lena was not reacting like an innocent person being misunderstood. She was reacting like a guilty person losing control of the narrative. Maya asked me quietly whether I regretted sending the selfie, and I did not lie to make myself look noble. I told her I regretted that she got dragged into the blast radius, but I did not regret creating a pressure point that made Lena reveal her panic, because panic is data, and data is what keeps this from turning into a he said, she said mess, where the liar wins by exhausting everyone else. Maya nodded like she understood, then she told me something that shifted the weight in my chest, because she said Lena had once joked months ago that if things ever got boring, she could always take a trip with Owen and make me jealous. And she had said it like a punchline, as if humiliating your husband was a hobby. That meant this was not an accident of poor judgment, it was a planned flirtation with cruelty, and planned cruelty deserves planned consequences. That night, Dana sent me a screenshot of a public tag removal attempt, showing that a story involving Lena had been posted, then tagged, then quickly scrubbed, and the timestamps lined up with the exact window when my phone blew up with calls and messages. Dana explained that Owen's friend circle was already talking because one of the Miami group had reposted something before it was deleted, and Dana had captured the permalink while it was still alive. She did not send me the entire content, just enough to show the tag existed and the date stamp existed, because we were both avoiding anything that looked like petty stalking. The funny thing about social media is that people think it is temporary until it becomes evidence, and then suddenly everyone remembers privacy. I opened my own socials, not to doom scroll, but to check for the kind of subtle ripples that mean someone is already shaping the story. Sure enough, there was a vague post from one of Lena's friends about toxic control and men who can't handle a confident woman, and it had enough likes to tell me Lena had already started the soft campaign. I saved a screenshot, not because it proved the affair, but because it proved intent, and intent matters when the narrative shifts from what happened to who is crazy. Then I did something I had been avoiding, because it felt like stepping into sewage, and I messaged Lena one sentence that forced her into a corner without sounding like an accusation. I asked her to confirm, in writing, whether Owen was traveling alone or with her, and I asked it the way an accountant asks a question, not the way a husband begs for mercy. Her reply came fast, and it was all smoke, saying I was obsessed, saying she had every right to travel, saying Owen and Dana had their own issues, and not once did she answer the yes or no question. That omission was the answer, and I saved it into the folder with a note that said, "Direct question avoided," because a pattern of avoidance is its own kind of confession when you document it cleanly. The next morning, Dana told me Owen had finally admitted Lena was in Miami, but he framed it as coincidence, saying they ran into each other. which is the kind of lie only a man with a straight face can deliver. Dana said she asked him how two people ran into each other on the same itinerary update, and he went quiet, then exploded, then demanded she stop harassing him. That was good because it meant the story was collapsing under its own weight, and the only thing left for them was to attack the people holding the scale. I felt the shift in Lena too, because her tone changed from pleading to strategic, and she wrote that she wanted to talk when she got home, which sounded reasonable until you realize it was also a demand for time. Time is what liars use to blur edges, to fade memory, to seed alternate explanations, and to coach witnesses into uncertainty. I wrote back that we could talk, but only after she provided a written summary of her itinerary dates, her lodging arrangements, and any shared expenses charged to the joint account, because if she wanted reconciliation, she could start with transparency. She responded with a message that accused me of treating her like a criminal, and I almost admired the nerve, because she wanted the benefits of trust while refusing the duties of honesty. Later that evening, I received a short notification from our building's front desk that a package had arrived for Lena, and the timing was perfect in the cruel way life likes. I went downstairs, signed for it, and carried it back up without opening it, because opening it would be a violation I did not need. The label showed a Miami return address, and the sender name was a generic shipping service, which told me nothing, but the existence of it told me everything, because people rarely mail themselves souvenirs when a suitcase exists. I photographed the label beside my phone, showing the date and time, then I placed the package on the shelf in the hall where Lena would see it the moment she returned, because sometimes the best trap is not a confrontation, it is a quiet object that forces a liar to explain first. Maya watched me do it, and she asked what would happen when Lena got back, and I told her the truth, which was that Lena would come home expecting a private fight, a messy argument, a few tears, maybe some makeup sex, and then a fragile ceasefire. I told Maya she was not coming home to that, because the story had already left the apartment and entered 2 institutions, 2 families, and 1 shared social ecosystem, and the truth had already begun to harden into something Lena could not reshape with charm. Maya looked frightened, then relieved, as if she had been waiting for someone to stop pretending this was normal, and she said she was tired of living in Lena's orbit, like everything had to revolve around Lena's feelings. That night, Dana and I agreed on the next step, and it was not dramatic, it was administrative, which is the kind of thing cheaters never respect until it crushes them. Dana said Owen's workplace was scheduling a preliminary compliance meeting, and she expected Owen to show up with a curated story about an unstable spouse. She asked if I would be willing to provide a simple affidavit-like statement, not notarized, just a signed timeline line stating that Lena had traveled with Owen, and that the itinerary update showed both names, because a second household confirming the same fact makes it harder for a man like Owen to pretend it is all marital hysteria. I told her I would, because my ego was not the point, and because this was not revenge, it was containment. I printed the timeline line, signed it, scanned it, and saved it into the folder with the rest, and as I did, I realized Lena and Owen had made the same mistake people always make when they treat betrayal like a game. They assumed the only consequence was emotional, which meant they assumed a clever apology could erase it, but they forgot that documented truth has a life of its own, and once it enters official systems, it stops caring whether you cry. When I finally turned off the light, my phone buzzed one more time, and it was Lena writing, with forced calm, that she was extending her trip 1 more day because something came up, and in that moment I understood she was not delaying for fun. She was delaying because she could feel the trap closing and she wanted time to build a new lie. I saved the message, stared at the Miami return address package in the hall, and knew the next move would not be in my living room, because she had already made this public the second she dared me to be jealous. By the time Lena announced she was extending her trip, my apartment no longer felt like a home with problems, it felt like a file room with furniture, and every object that used to mean something now only mattered for what it could prove. I did not reply right away, not because I was stunned, but because I wanted her to sit with the silence long enough to feel the new balance of power, and I wanted my next message to look like a man responding to logistics, not a husband begging for reassurance. When I finally answered, I told her I understood, I wished her safe travel, and I asked her to email me her updated return time for planning purposes, because nothing irritates a liar more than being treated like a schedule instead of a goddess. She reacted exactly how people react when they realize their emotional leash has been cut, which was to send more words than the situation required, as if volume could replace control. And she wrote that I was being cold, that I was punishing her, and that I was making her feel unsafe. And those were the kinds of phrases that arrive prepackaged, like they were pulled from a group chat where everyone speaks the same dialect of blame. I read it once, then I saved it, because if she decided to build a narrative about me later, She would not start with facts, she would start with feelings, and I wanted a clean trail showing how quickly she tried to frame me as the villain once she could not frame herself as harmless. Dana called after dinner, and her voice had the careful calm of someone trying not to scare herself with her own competence. Owen's workplace had scheduled a compliance intake call for the next morning, and she said he was already messaging mutual friends with soft hints that she was spiraling, which meant he was rehearsing the same play he had used on her before, just with new costumes. She asked me again for the signed timeline line, and I told her it was already scanned, already saved, and already sent to her secure email, and I heard her exhale like she had been holding her breath all week. The strange thing about betrayal is that it teaches you who you can trust by forcing you to trust someone you never wanted to meet, and Dana and I were becoming a kind of reluctant alliance, bonded by the simplest fact in the world, which was that we both preferred documents over drama. After we hung up, I stood in the hallway staring at the Miami return address package like it was a witness that refused to speak. I did not open it, and I did not move it. Because the point was not curiosity, the point was pressure, and pressure works best when it is silent. I imagined Lena walking in, seeing it, and deciding within 2 seconds whether to ignore it, explain it, or pretend it was for someone else, and each choice would tell me something useful about her current strategy. Then I did what I had been putting off, which was to call my parents, because family is where narratives go to breed, and I wanted mine to arrive first. My mother answered with that cheerful tone people use when they assume the call is normal, and I did not let her live in that assumption for long. I told her Lena was traveling, I told her she was traveling with her ex, and I told her there was another spouse involved who was already contacting institutions and gathering proof. I kept my voice steady, because if I sounded angry, it would become a marriage fight in her mind, and I needed it to sound like a report, because reports force adults to behave like adults. My mother went quiet, in the way that says she is trying to decide which version of reality hurts less, and then she asked me if I was sure, and I told her I was not guessing, I was documenting, and I could send her the timeline if she wanted to see it. She did not ask for the timeline, not because she did not believe me, but because belief is easier when you can pretend you do not need details, and that was the first small disappointment of the night. She said she would call Lena's parents, and I told her not to, because I did not want a screaming match to soften the edges of what was coming, and I did not want Lena to come home preloaded with sympathy from a family phone chain. I asked my mother to do one thing instead, which was to stay neutral and to refuse any story that painted me as controlling or unstable, and she promised she would, although promises in families sometimes mean, I will try, until someone cries. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a notification from the shared account, a charge that was small enough to be forgettable and specific enough to be lethal, and it was a bar tab in Miami stamped with a time that made Lena's early night message from the previous evening look ridiculous. I stared at it for a moment, then I took a screenshot, then I requested the transaction details through the bank interface I was authorized to access, and I saved the confirmation screen as well, because a screenshot without context is just a picture, but a screenshot with a banking reference is a brick. I did not text Lena about it, because confronting a liar early is like warning a thief that you have installed locks, and I wanted her to keep moving naturally until the door closed behind her. Around noon, Maya stopped by again, and she looked exhausted in the particular way people look when they have spent hours being used as a messenger. Lena had called her in the morning and tried a new angle, telling her she was scared of me, telling her she thought I might do something, and that made my jaw tighten, because when someone starts planting fear, they are not trying to be understood. They are trying to be believed before the facts arrive. Maya said she told Lena she was being dramatic, and Lena responded by accusing Maya of wanting my attention, which was such a cheap, ugly deflection that Maya actually laughed while she repeated it, then immediately looked guilty for laughing. I told Maya she had nothing to feel guilty about, because laughing at manipulation is not cruelty, it is self-defense. Later, Dana texted me a short update that made my stomach drop even though I had been expecting something like it. Owen had told the compliance intake caller that Dana was harassing him, and he implied that Lena was just a friend caught in the middle, which meant he was trying to isolate each scandal from the other, cutting the rope between the two of us so that he could survive by keeping each spouse confused and alone. Dana said she corrected him with one sentence and offered to provide her proof in writing, and she said the caller's tone shifted once she used the words documented timeline, because institutions have no patience for theatrical men. They only care about liability. That evening, I received an email from our building management confirming a minor detail I had asked about earlier, which was the logged time of a maintenance visit that Lena had claimed she waited at home for last week. The email was polite and boring, and that was exactly why it mattered, because boring is the language of records, and the record showed she had not been present at the time she said she was. I saved the email with headers visible, placed it into my folder, and updated my evidence ledger with a simple line, because the story was becoming less about whether she cheated and more about how many different ways she was willing to lie once she started. By the time night came, I realized I was no longer reacting to Lena. I was building a corridor she would have to walk through when she returned, and every door in that corridor would be labeled with a date, a place, and a payment. I was not proud of how calm I felt, and I was not ashamed either, because calm was the only state that made the truth usable. When Lena finally sent a new message, saying she would be home soon and asking if we could reset when she landed, I replied with one sentence that sounded almost kind, and I told her we could talk as soon as she returned, and that I had prepared something to make the conversation easier for both of us. The typing bubble appeared, vanished, then appeared again, and I watched it like a heartbeat monitor, because I could tell she was realizing that whatever I had prepared was not going to be a romantic apology letter, and when she finally answered, she asked me what I meant by prepared, and I did not respond, because the truth was already sitting in the hallway, waiting for her to walk through the door. The day Lena's flight finally showed on the arrival board, the city felt too bright for what was about to happen, and I noticed small, stupid things, like how clean the glass doors looked and how calmly strangers dragged their luggage, like nobody ever returned home to a life that had already moved on without them. I parked in short term, kept my hands off my phone for 10 full minutes, and forced myself to breathe like a man who had nothing to fear, because panic would only make me sloppy, and sloppiness would turn evidence into opinion. Dana had sent me a final update before her own meeting, one line that mattered more than any insult, which was that Owen had requested a delay and blamed stress, meaning the confident liar was suddenly begging for time, and time is what liars ask for when the walls begin to talk. I walked into the terminal with one simple goal, which was to stay boring and predictable, because predictable men do not get labeled as threats, and I needed Lena's story to collapse without giving her a dramatic excuse to pivot into victimhood. She came through the gate wearing the kind of vacation glow that looks good on social media and looks disgusting in real life, dragging a carry-on that had a new tag on it, a small detail that told me she had changed something about her trip at the last minute. When she saw me, she smiled like we were about to hug in a movie, then hesitated when my face did not move, and I could almost see her recalculating which mask to wear. She asked why I was there, because she said she could have taken a ride share, and I told her I was doing the polite thing, and I watched her accept that answer even though it clearly irritated her, because politeness steals a manipulator's oxygen. In the car, she tried to start with soft jokes, then she tried nostalgia, then she tried irritation, and the shifts were fast enough to be obvious, like she had a playlist of strategies, and she was skipping tracks when the beat felt wrong. I kept my eyes on the road and let her talk, because I was not collecting feelings, I was collecting contradictions, and she gifted me 3 of them in under 10 minutes. She said she mostly stayed at the hotel, but then she mentioned a cafe near the marina like she had been there more than once, and she said she barely saw her ex. But she also said they ended on good terms, which implies time, and time is the one thing she pretended she did not have. When we reached our building, she paused before getting out, and she asked if I was still mad, and I told her I was not mad, I was organized, and that word made her go quiet in a way anger never could. Upstairs, the hallway light hit the Miami package like a spotlight, and she froze for a second, then tried to walk past it like it was invisible, and that tiny pause told me more than any confession ever would. Inside the apartment, she looked around as if she expected candles or divorce papers, and I gave her neither, because I wanted her to feel the discomfort of normal furniture holding abnormal truth. She asked if we could talk later, because she said she was tired, and I said we could talk now, because tired people make mistakes, and mistakes are honest. I walked to the kitchen table and set down a single page, the one-page date-place payment ledger, no drama, no photos, just facts arranged like a spine, and I watched her eyes move across it as her vacation face slowly died. She tried to laugh, then she tried to accuse me of tracking her, and I told her everything on that page came from accounts and records I had lawful access to, and from people who spoke voluntarily, and I reminded her that I never once mentioned her ex first. She did. That was the moment her confidence snapped into something sharper, and she said her sister was involved, and she said I was humiliating her on purpose, and she said she would tell everyone I was unstable, and I let her finish, because threats are useful when they are spoken clearly. Then I slid my phone across the table and showed her the last message Dana had forwarded, the one where Owen tried to paint her as a harmless friend, and I told her she had been used as a shield, and shields get broken first. She stared at the screen, and for a brief second I saw real fear, not performative fear, but the kind that comes when a person realizes their story has stopped working on the people who matter. I told her we were going to attend one meeting in 3 days, a meeting where witnesses would be present and minutes would be taken, and she could either walk in as a person who cooperated with reality, or as a person who fought it until it crushed her. She asked what meeting, and I told her it was the kind of meeting where silence has weight and where one question can end a career, and I watched her swallow hard as she finally understood that her return home was not the end of the trip, it was the start of the reckoning. By the time the third day arrived, I had slept in thin slices because a clean plan does not calm you when you know the room will be full of people who love stories more than truth. And my wife had spent 2 nights trying to drag me into private drama where she could twist the lighting. I refused every invitation, not because I enjoyed being cold, but because private fights are where liars win and public records are where they drown. The meeting was scheduled in a glass conference room on the 12th floor, the kind with a long table and a wall screen that makes everyone feel important, and it was hosted by HR because Owen's work trip cover had started bleeding into payroll, travel reimbursements, and conduct policy. Lena walked in wearing a careful outfit that said stability, while her eyes said she had not closed them in days, and Owen followed like a man who believed he could charm the building itself into forgiving him. There were 7 chairs already filled, including the HR compliance lead, a note-taker, a director who looked tired of surprises, and one neutral facilitator whose job was to keep the conversation boring and therefore lethal. I sat where I could see everyone's hands, because hands tell the truth before mouths do, and I placed a thin folder on the table without opening it, because anticipation is a tool when you use it quietly. Lena tried to greet me like we were still a couple with normal problems, and I gave her a nod that contained no warmth and no hatred, only recognition that she had chosen this corridor and could not turn around now. Owen tried a small smile in my direction, the kind men use when they want to signal dominance without earning it, and I answered with nothing at all because silence is the most humiliating form of recognition. The facilitator started with procedure, and Owen started with confidence, because he had practiced his lines and believed practice equals protection. He framed the Miami week as a misunderstanding, he framed Lena as emotional, and he framed me as jealous, which was predictable, because men like him always want the husband to look irrational so the wife's lies can look like self-defense. Lena added her version with the same rhythm, which is what happens when 2 people rehearse the same cover story until it becomes a duet, and she kept returning to the word harmless as if repeating it could turn a lie into a legal category. The HR lead asked for dates, then asked for receipts, then asked for who approved the travel, and I watched Owen's confidence tighten around his jaw as he realized the questions were about records, not feelings. When the facilitator asked if anyone had documentation that might clarify the timeline, I slid 1 page across the table. Not a speech, not an accusation, just a ledger with dates, locations, and payment owners, formatted like something a boring person would make for a boring reason. The note-taker looked up, the HR lead leaned in, and Lena's fingers pressed into her own palm under the table like she was trying to stop herself from grabbing the paper and shredding it with her nails. Owen asked where I got it, and I said it came from our shared accounts, our shared calendar, and public metadata that did not require permission, and I watched him shift from charm to threat in less than a breath. Lena tried to interrupt, claiming privacy, and the facilitator asked a simple question, which was whether the entries were authentic, and Lena hesitated long enough for the room to hear the answer before she spoke. That was when the HR lead asked the note-taker to project the minutes on the wall screen, because the organization liked clean process, and clean process is a guillotine when the blade is a documented fact. I did not gloat, and I did not raise my voice, because loud husbands become the story, and I refused to be the story. I opened my folder and placed 2 supporting items beside the ledger, one being a merchant alert tied to my account that matched a Miami hotel folio number, and the other being a public story screenshot where Lena had been tagged at a place she claimed she never visited, both with timestamps that did not care about her tone. The HR lead asked Owen to explain why a subordinate's travel and expenses showed up in a pattern that matched personal activity, and asked Lena why her cover story kept colliding with objective time. And the room went quiet in the way it only goes quiet when adults realize they are watching consequences being assembled. Owen tried to pivot and say this was a marital issue, and the director cut him off by pointing to the policy line the HR lead had already highlighted, and I could almost feel the air change as Owen understood he could not argue his way out of a rule that had been written before he met Lena. The facilitator asked Lena to confirm one date, just one, and she chose the wrong one, because liars always gamble when they are cornered, and the HR lead matched her answer to the printed timeline on the wall and said the words evidence received while the note-taker typed them live. Lena looked at me like she wanted me to rescue her from the cliff she had jumped from, and I gave her the only rescue I believed in, which was the truth sitting on the table. The director instructed HR to begin the formal review immediately. Owen's face drained as he realized his badge did not make him untouchable, and Lena's mouth opened for a protest that never arrived, because for the first time in weeks, there was nothing left to spin, only a record that would not forget.